All right, so this is a continuation of solving equations, and our textbook talked about a couple of different strategies: rewriting, undoing, looking inside, and fraction busting. So I want to do a couple of examples of each just to kind of go through what was in the book. Now you'll notice this first problem is the one that I hadn't used in the other video and said that there's several ways to do it. So you'll see I'm going to do this problem 3 separate ways just to show you really that there are so many different ways to solve equations. The first one would be rewriting. What if we wanted to rewrite this problem? Well, a lot of people would look at this problem and distribute the 2 and multiply it to each term inside. So 2 times n is 2n, 2 times 5 is 10, equals negative 2. They would subtract 10 from each side and get 2n equals negative 12, and then divide by 2 and get n equals negative 6. And you might recall from the last video, we'd already checked if we plug in negative 6, and it did work. So negative 6 plus 5 is negative 1. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. So we know the answer is n equals negative 6. Again, the idea is just showing different ways to solve it. A second way would be what happened in the last video, just saying, oh, order of operations says the first thing I would do is add 5. The second thing I would do is multiply by 2. So I'll work backwards here. To get rid of a times 2, I'll divide 2. And to get rid of a plus 5, I'll subtract 5. And this will be the order that I solve this equation. And I'll go over here and I'll divide both sides by 2. Those will cancel out and leave me n plus 5. And a negative divided by a positive is negative. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Now I'll subtract 5. And negative 1 minus 5 is negative 6. And again, you can see we get that same answer. If we were looking inside, and I kind of like looking inside, it has a lot of mental math in it. What we're saying is, hey, look, 2 times something equals negative 2. And that something would be negative 1, right? 2 times negative 1 equals negative 2. So how would I turn this parenthesis and make it equal negative 1? Because I already have the 2 here, and I already have the negative 2 here. What I need is this parentheses to be negative 1. And the way that I would get that to happen is if n equaled negative 6, right? Negative 6 plus 5 equals negative 1, and now I have 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. So just sort of mental math. And again, you can see those 3 different strategies I used all yielded the same answer, that n equals negative 6. So I wanted to do a different problem of each just to see, some ways you can do it. So rewriting, if you had a problem like this, maybe you'd say, hey, look, this is in the hundreds, this is in the hundreds, this is in the hundreds. So why don't I just take 2 zeros off of each of these and rewrite this equation? And now I have a much smaller problem. And I don't have to worry about all those extra zeros. So I've rewritten it so that I have smaller numbers. I can go in and check my answer in the original by plugging in 3 for x. And of course, 300 times 3 is 900. And 400 plus 900, I think I put one too many there. 400 plus 900 is 1300, so that worked. But again, that was just a little rewriting trick that I used. If I go to undoing here, the first thing I would do is multiply by 2/3. And some of you might see this as multiplying by 2 and dividing by 3. It's the same idea. Once I've multiplied by 2/3, then I'm going to add 1. So if I want to get rid of a plus 1, I'll subtract 1. And if I want to get rid of a multiplying by 2/3, the way to get rid of that is to multiply by 3/2, right? Because I know that the tops will cross cancel and they'll get rid of each other. So in order to get rid of a multiplying by 2/3, I'm going to multiply by 3/2. Now, some of you might say, well, it seems like the opposite of multiplying by 2/3 would be divide by 2/3. And you're exactly right. But you'll recall we never divide fractions. We always multiply reciprocals. So there you go. Dividing 2/3 is the same as multiplying 3/2, and that's how we do that. So I'll go over here and I'll subtract 1. I get 2/3 x equals 6. Now I'll multiply both sides by 3/2. Cross cancel leaves me x here. And again, if you don't like the way this looks, put a 1 underneath so that they're equally balanced. Now you either have 18, 6 times 3, right? Multiply the tops and get 18. And then we multiply the bottoms and get 2. So 18 divided by 2 is 9. Or the other way we can do it, and honestly the way I preferred is cross-canceling. I say, oh, what number goes into 1 and 3? Well, 1, that doesn't matter. But what number goes into 2 and 6? Well, 2 does. 2 goes into 2 once, and 2 goes into 6 3 times. So 3 times 3 is 9. So either way, you get the same answer whether or not you cross-canceled. If I go back up here, I can plug in 9. And again, I'm going to just make it a fraction. That way it's friendlier to look at, I think. And again, you can multiply 2 times 9 and get 18, and 3 times 1 and get 3, and realize that equals 6. Or, like I said, what I prefer, cross-cancel. I can't cross-cancel a 2 and 1, but a 3 and 9, 3 goes into 3 once, and 3 goes into 9 3 times, and 2 times 3 is 6. So either way, you get 6. Plus 1 equals 7. So that way it worked out. And if I go to looking inside on this one, my idea would be this. Hey, look, I know that 5 plus 1 equals 6. So how do I make this equal 5? The square root of what number equals 5? And of course it's 25. The square root of 25 is 5. So if I sub that in. So again, looking inside is just sort of taking a step back and looking at the problem and seeing if there's an easy way to solve it in your head. Now, if we go to fraction busting, and I know that this is something a lot of my students do not enjoy. There's a couple of different ways that we can fraction bust. We can do it in 1 step or 2 steps, but I'm just going to show it in 1 step because I think that becomes easier the more comfortable you have with it. We're looking for what's known as the least common denominator, or what's the smallest number that 2 and 5 both go into. So if I were to sort of go off to the side and say, here's the numbers that 2 goes into, right? And here's the numbers that 5 go into. What's the smallest one? And it appears to be 10. So 10 is the number that I want to use. I'm going to multiply every term here by 10. And just to kind of make this look maybe a little bit better, I'll rewrite it. So I have 10 over 1 times x over 2 plus 10 over 1 times x over 5 equals 10 times 3, right? We don't really need to make this one a fraction if we don't want to, although if it makes you feel comfortable to do that, feel free. But you can see I'm multiplying the x over 2 by 10, the x over 5 by 10, and the 3 by 10. The reason why I put these as fractions is I want to cross cancel, right? 2 goes into 2 once, it goes into 10 5 times, 5 times x on top, 1 on bottom, so I just get 5x. And that's going to work because we use the least common denominator. We expect the bottom of the fraction to go away. So here, 5 goes into 5 once, 5 goes into 10 twice, 2 times x is 2x, 1 times 1 on bottom is divide by 1. It doesn't matter. It just goes away. And then finally, 10 times 3 is 30. So I can combine like terms. I get 7x equals 30. I can divide by 7. X equals 30 over 7. I can't simplify that. This is fine as an answer. If you wanted to call it 4 and 2/7, you could, although I wouldn't. I'll spare you the conversation. If you were in my class this year, you know why. Some of you guys might grab a calculator and get, I don't know, 4.28 or 4.29 or whatever it comes into. But again, I wouldn't either. I would personally just leave it like this, but I wouldn't mark these wrong. I don't know if Mrs. Baldwin would. All right, so moving along, one more example of fraction busting. And again, try and think about, what do you think the least common denominator is? What's the smallest number that 5 and 3 both go into? So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, and then 5, 10, 15. It looks like 15 is going to be the smallest number that they both go into. So I'll multiply everything by 15. And again, I'll rewrite that. So I have 15 times y minus, I'll put it 15 over 1 times 2 over 5 is equal to 15 over 1 times 1/3. And you'll notice I just put the negative out in front. You could have put the negative over here. It would have been fine. It doesn't really matter. So here I get 15y. Here I will cross cancel. 5 goes into 5 once. 5 goes into 15 3 times. 3 times 2 is 6. Again, the 1 on bottom is irrelevant. Here, a negative times a positive is negative. 3 goes into 3 once. 3 goes into 15 5 times. And I get 5. I'll add 6 to both sides. I'll get 15y equals 1. I'll divide by 15. So I'll make myself a little bit of room over here. Y is equal to 1/15. I know fraction busting can be a little bit tricky. I know a lot of kids aren't super confident with fractions or super excited about them. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Mrs. Baldwin, and we'll be glad to help.